And this week was so special. It was, in many ways, the greatest 8 days of my life. The greatest 8 days of my life. Wow. Filled with all of every emotion, every pain, every joy, every laughter, every reconnection, new things emerging. This opportunity to offer this as we're doing now, like share this, open source it. And so I can ride a story from a different octave and say, Dad, yeah, maybe you did have a choice, but actually maybe there was an even higher force that was riding through you. And that was leading you right to this moment right here where everything is redeemed by this choice and through this choice that we've made to honor you and bring you into your fullness, that everything was perfect, Dad. So I forgive you, Dad. You know, like I fully forgive you because we've made the choice to fully redeem, you know? This podcast with Marc Gafni was after 7 days of sitting Shiva, honoring the life and honoring the legacy of my father, and also the ceremony that commemorated his passing. And we were tired, we were exhausted, but looking back on those 8 days, they were some of the best days of my life. And I felt my father with me then, and I feel my father with me now. And so what could have been a tragedy was an opportunity for transformation and the ability to hold my father close as an ally in the unseen, non-physical realms. And subsequently, since that passing, he's come to me in my dream time, and I feel his presence more strongly ever in those worlds than I have in my whole life. And of course, I miss him, and I love him, and I wish I could give him a hug in the flesh and talk to him about all the wild ideas I have. But in some way, I know that his mind and his spirit is with me now always. And this podcast tells the story of everything that transpired, all of the miracles that we experienced, and hopefully gives a roadmap for you to see if this story works for you and how you might want to honor those that pass, and whether they've already passed or whether it's just an idea of a new way, an evolutionary way to take the old lineage traditions and evolve them with the medicine traditions and everything that I've incorporated into my own life. So I hope this series, Blessings of the Father Part 1, and this podcast, Blessings of the Father Part 2, can offer a map and also a vulnerable look inside the experience that I had in really honoring the life and death of my father, Michael Phillips Marcus. Enjoy the podcast. Marc, my brother.
Shah. God, what a week.
What a week.
Oh my God, we're a bit exhausted, huh?
Yeah. I mean, we sat 7 days of Shiva House.
7 days of...
blended in the Shabbat table technology, our shamanic technology. We journeyed. We journeyed together. We blew it away in the ceremony. I mean, I've never felt a response from anything I've done. And then other than what we did in that ceremony, that's been more powerful from just people receiving it. And it's just a beautiful reflection of a legendary man who got to get sent off in a legendary way. And so here we are for part 2 of the Blessings of the Father. And you know, one of the things that we talked about in the ceremony was, of course, one of the blessings of the Father was that we got to actually go through this process.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the huge blessings was that we got to actually evolve and weave the threads of all of our mastery together to create something that's never been done before, really.
I mean, first off, just love you, Matt. I mean, just what a week. It's almost like when you go through this with someone and you think you know each other.
Yeah.
And you think like you couldn't be closer. And you realize that it's just this great realization that love is actually infinite, right? And that love, when love is real, like Aubrey and Vailana, if I really love Vailana, it's actually in 3 years from now, I'm going to love her like crazy more. And I'm going to look back at 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It's how you know intimacy is infinite. You can always go deeper. So we went deeper this week, right? And maybe before we dive in, just blessings to brotherhood in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Brothers we need more brothers in the world.
Yeah, and all my brothers showed up, and all my sisters showed up.
All the sisters showed up.
Every different, we for those of you who follow me, you know that I commemorate these brothers and sisters with a bead exchange on my necklace, and every bead on the necklace showed up, and many more that are we're still forming and crystallizing the depth of that connection. Everybody showed up, and just mad gratitude for everyone who supported me through this process and supported my dad through this process.
Yeah. And I was actually reading last night at like 2 a.m. I was reading that chapter on your dad from the book on traders.
Market Wizards by Jack Schwager.
Marco, and you had mentioned the book to me, and just integrity between brothers. Maybe 2 a.m. I looked at the chapter, and that's a different conversation. So let's go for the blessing of the Father.
Yeah.
And, everyone, wherever they are in the world, there's this moment, there's this window of time when the doors are open. Now, you can always open the doors, but there's also moments in time where there's a particular invitation. In Hebrew, the word for time is invitation, zman, Z-E-M-A-N. Time means invitation. And so there's a door open now, and we were talking before, there's a lot we could talk about this week, but actually, we all have fathers, and there's the great father in culture. And we're really committed this week. And Michael's energy is cause. And because his energy is cause, it actually allows him to rise. Mm-hmm. So the son goes to find the father in these dialogues by creating energy that he's cause of that allows the father to rise. And that is also just for me, for you, for anyone. When I lose a parent, the way to liberate the parent is to allow them to be cause in your life. So mystically, when I die, I become impotent, at least relative to this world. I can't play anymore. I can't make any more trades. I can make trades in the next part of the journey. No more trades here, right? No more futures. But the son can liberate the father, because we created this week in which Michael was so fucking alive.
Yeah.
And cause that the son liberates the father. So we're in that. This is the gate's still open. Mm-hmm. Next time we podcast, it'll be about something else.
Yeah.
But the gate's fucking open now.
And Thursday on 4/6, we're going to be actually putting my father into the ground. So we've done the 7 days of Shiva House. We did the 8th day, the liberation, the celebration, the commemoration, brought everybody together and gave it our full hearts and our full tears and all of it. And then now we're in another mini bardo as we kind of integrate all of the unbelievable miracles of this week and all of the great blessings of the Father and blessings of the sisters and brothers and blessings universally. And then this little bardo where we'll finally, close this chapter, but also leave open all of the threads that the blessings have opened.
All the threads the blessings have opened. And for those people who track these things closely, we're not doing just the old lineage. In the old lineage, you first do the burial and then you do the 7 days. So for those people listening, they're doing it in the wrong order. What we're actually doing is we're taking pieces from different technologies and we're weaving together a vision of world religion. So we did ceremony and we did Shabbat psychotech kinetics and we did Shiva and it's all coming together. Mm-hmm. So let's put a frame on the table. That can kind of be a frame for us. So pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's helped me through life. It's, one of those frames that she whispered, at some point a decade ago. And so let me unpack it and then let's see how this plays in your story this week. And I'm going to weave things that I heard. And I've sat in 7 Shiva House tables with people gathered around and raising glasses and crying and laughing. And each night it was a different vision of Michael.
Yeah, it was. That was also really remarkable.
Completely different.
To see how the spirit of my dad was evoked and a different version of him. It's like the multifaceted prism of his unique self. Through every different angle that you looked at it, through everybody else's prism, he actually appeared differently. You know?
And
it's a great lesson from that.
Different person appeared. And that's what it means. It's what we do for each other. And there's a part of Marc that appears only when he's talking to Aubrey.
Mm-hmm.
A part of Aubrey that appears only when he's talking to Marc. There's a part of Vailana that appears only when she's talking to Aubrey, and another part that appears when she's having a conversation with Caitlin.
Mm-hmm.
So what love does is, love evokes a dimension of the person that can't appear in any other way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means. It's a wild thing. And when the lineage has this insanely beautiful realization, it's not an idea, it's a knowing that we do the same thing for God. And I know we're making a project because we got a podcast with God. So we got to do a full, let's talk about God. But for now, let's just say God, the infinite, right? God, source, right? God, Mat, Geist, implicate order. Atman is Brahman, Adonaihu Elohim, right? The great sky, whatever that means. But that thing that's larger than us, that holds us, that's in us, and that makes it all meaningful.
Amen.
Right? God got us. Amen. So, just feel into this for a second. Chat. Hold for a second, guys. I apologize. I've actually lost the thread.
Pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic.
No, but it was God. Where were we on God? Where cut this? Where there was a particular key God thing we're going to do. God. So the lineage has this realization that we do that for God. In other words, Aubrey evokes a dimension of God. What does that even mean? That no one else can evoke. So God experiences a kind of shocking self-recognition in his conversation with Aubrey that she can't experience talking to Christian or talking to Marc or talking to Aaron. It's meaning, and it's in that sense, we need our beloveds. We need our beloveds. We don't only love them, we see them, we bracket ourselves to be in devotion to them, and they give us ourselves back. See, when you have a real lover, your lover gifts you with yourself because something of you shows up in a way that no one else can evoke it.
Yep.
And so every one of those Shiva nights, each group of people evoked your dad in a different way. And it was like 7 different Michaels appeared every night.
Yeah.
Okay. So gathering from the Shiva house, we got these 3 images, and we're going to, with your permission, brother, we're going to use your life as our sacred text, right? In other words, right? Because all of this, that's our mantra for this week. All of this is just words until we learn it in the stories of our lives. So Aubrey's life as sacred autobiography, but also, love, as a chapter in the sacred autobiography of God. That's what it means to be a unique self, that my life is a chapter in the sacred autobiography of God. It's a very precise idea. So Aubrey, we heard during the week about Dad asks Aubrey, what do you want your room to look like? And Aubrey says, a cave. Right? That's a story that ran through the week, right? And Dad gets the best fucking cave people in America to go make a cave.
Yeah. Special effects cave people, not like spelunkers.
Not right. Real cave people, right? Like real cave people, right? So this is the dad larger than life. This is the Aubrey dad. This is the pre-tragic stage. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Pre-tragic is good. It's a gorgeous stage.
Yeah, anything was possible in Dad's magical kingdom.
Anything was possible, right? Right? And then you ran into the tragic, brother. I mean, and you so ran into the tragic that you and I talked for 18 months straight without this ever coming up. Meaning it had gotten put away. And we talked about everything. And we only talked about your dad like 3 weeks ago, right? So Dad ran into the dark night of the soul that ripped his heart apart. And he just went through just listening to your description, we went to the house and went through a decade plus of just being alone in a tormented and painful and place that he couldn't access anyone and no one could access him.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say it ripped his heart apart. It just actually, I don't think the heart can be ripped apart, from my conception of it, but it denied him access to it. His prism got so dense and obscured by the fog of distortion and delusion and the voices that came in his head that actually the light couldn't shine through up from his heart or down from the true clear light, panim al panim, face to face with the truth, source, love, God, great spirit. Right. And he got lost in the dark forest.
And then you feel like your heart's ripped apart. And it's always the one
and
heart.
You could be convinced.
That's right. It's always the one heart. It's always the one love. But we feel like, I remember in 2006, like my heart felt ripped apart. Right. Even though I knew it wasn't.
Right.
So
heartbreak is that paradox of you feel it, but it's not true.
That's right. And you actually feel it. You realize, that's why that word is there.
Yeah.
Like my heart's heavy. Like your heart's actually heavy. So he's in the tragic. And then your relationship with him is in the tragic. Because you can't find your hero. You can't find dad. And it could be over there. But then something happens. And what happens is death. And death opens a door. Death actually pressed us into life. And as dad stepped into the next world, out of the tragic falls away, the mist, the distortion of the tragic falls away. And then Aubrey can find dad again. And for 7 days, Vailana meets dad, right? For the first time. She didn't really, right? And dad's awake and there's joy and there's stories and we choose which stories to tell.
And recovered memories.
I
mean, there was whole chapters of things that it seems impossible that I would have forgotten. And I didn't forget because as soon as the spark was there, it illuminated a whole pathway, a whole neural, encoding of files that were just zipped in my brain. And I was like, holy shit, that Grand Prix racing game where he had an open challenge to any competitor to come and race him in the old arcade game in Monaco that he had in his office, and things that I was like, oh my God, how did I forget that? So it was so beautiful to like bring him alive in the fullness of my own memory, and also to feel him and actually connect with him through the shamanic journey technology that we have as well. Connect with him and hear his laughter and cry with him the tears and feel him as well. It was really, really beautiful.
And there's the post-tragic.
Yeah.
So that's the post-tragic. So the post-tragic includes but transcends the deepest pre-tragic. We went to all the pre-tragic gorgeous memories, but it doesn't bypass the heartbreak, the distortion, the illusion, the pain of the tragic, but it doesn't get stuck there. There's a moment where we grieve, and then when we grieve, we cast out the remorse that deadens us. So there's this poem that I always love by Yeats that kind of captures this. I want to just gift you with it. It's like, because this was you this week, right? We're grieving, we're sad, but in that sadness, we feel those feelings to completion, and then joy steps in. When such as I cast out remorse, so great a sweetness fills my breast. We can dance and we can sing. We're blessed by everything, and everything we look upon is blessed. Post-tragic.
Yeah. That's seeing, it's the capital K kingdom. It's the more beautiful world. It's a whole perspective shift. It's the regular world, but at a different octave.
I can see with God's eyes.
Yeah.
And to be a lover is to see with God's eyes. And you could see your love of your dad. It never disappeared, ever. But it came back online in this new way.
Yeah, and it was always there. It was always
there's
always letters and emails, and I would send a photo and try and reach him and penetrate that dark forest, and always holding on to hope that maybe he would find his way just to a clearing where he would just respond even a little bit, so that we could rekindle something, have just some little bit of wood. That's like, if there's a little bit of wood there, we can make a little bit of a spark. And if we can make a little bit of a spark, maybe we can illuminate the darkness of this forest. And it never came.
But here's the thing, right? And let me offer this to you, brother. Had you not done all those things that never came, you wouldn't have been able to do this week.
Yeah.
Because you would have been too far away. You wouldn't have been able to cross the chasm. But all the things that you did, all the seeds you planted that looked like they didn't bear fruit, actually opened the door for this week.
Yeah.
And so in this world religion as a context for our diversity, which is the great father that we're together with our whole group of friends and beloveds trying to bring into the world, we're offering a frame. This is a big one, friends. This is fucking huge. Pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's just spend just 5 minutes. Let's just stay in this for a second. So let me throw out just one or two examples and we'll just play with them, because I don't think there's a person listening in the world, not a part of me that's listening, not a part of you that's listening that doesn't. We need the technology of the post-tragic. And if you asked me, if you would push me to the wall, right, and say, okay, Mark, as I've invited you into my medicine world, Mark, what do you think about my medicine world, right? I'd say medicine together with dharma, but medicine is very important, opens you to the post-tragic.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't answer the tragic. It doesn't take you back. Wrong use of medicine is an attempt to get back to the pre-tragic.
Yeah.
So that's what crack, misused cocaine, right? Misused cannabis.
Misused anything.
Right? I go, let's take medicine, turn it into a drug or an opioid that takes you back to the pre-tragic. So I can't handle the tragic, so I'm going to access this journey to take me back to the pre-tragic. That's exactly not medicine.
No, it's regressive.
And that why? And medicine takes you, what a gorgeous distinction, from the tragic to the post-tragic. So the difference between medicine and regressive drugs takes you to pre-tragic, medicine takes you to post-tragic.
It's beautiful.
Right? I'm just like, right?
It's
So
beautiful.
That's beautiful, right? It's like, and one of the exciting things about this moment is we're doing this for real life. So this is something just coming up between us right now. We've never thought about this distinction before. It just landed for us right now.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go take a note in my phone right now so I can make sure that I include that in my next book that I'm writing about psychonautics. Right. It's so true.
It's such a gorgeous distinction.
Yeah.
It just came down for us right now. Right? It's like, wow. Right? So thank you, she. Right? Mm-hmm. It's exciting. It's exciting, right?
She being another name for the great divine.
She being another name, right? And as you know, that's the name I use all the time. That's the name that, that she.
Shekinah.
Yeah. Shekinah. And God, I'm so looking forward to talk about God, Goddess with you. And but let's stay here. Okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's get it. Okay. So let's play this for a second. So let's take, and this is a realm I understand that you don't know much about, but I'll try and talk a little bit, sexuality. No. I guess you probably, sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry.
I have a lot more to learn.
Oh my God, don't we all?
I need to continue practicing.
Teach me, brother.
Yes.
Teach me, sister. Teach me, goddess. Okay, so let's take sex for a second, sexuality. So pre-tragic sexing, and it's very subtle to get the pre-tragic. There's two kinds of pre-tragic sexing. One is everything goes, do what you like, meaning it's all fine. It's all good, right? There are no rules. It's just totally good all the time, meaning there's no complexity. You're not dealing with the hurt. You're not dealing with the ecstasy. It just becomes a purely biological act. Let's have lunch. Let's have sex. It's pre-tragic.
Do you think that anybody actually gets to live that pre-tragic? It feels like almost
no one ever lives that.
That's
it's
denied
an illusion.
Us. It's an illusion.
It's
a time in the past that we could imagine, or maybe some cultures that still have maintained it. But
I mean, sex
complicated.
Sex Before Dawn tried to that book tried to elucidate it, but even there, it was very, very complex.
Sex at Dawn by Chris Ryan is
by Chris Ryan, right. Sex at Dawn, right? Who knows what was going on before dawn, right? That was the middle of the night. That's the hot stuff was before dawn.
There was some Gomorrah happening.
Right? So one image of pre-tragic sex is it's all good. Right? But it's we never get there. But there's this thing, wow, can you imagine? I remember watching with KK, with my partner, late night. We couldn't sleep, and she flips on her computer, and there's some movie about a guy who, a woman's invited him to kind of no strings attached sex. And he says, there's no such thing. What do you mean? And he's crossing the country to get there for this, this. So that's pre-tragic. But there's another kind of pre-tragic. So pre-tragic means everything's clear. There's no complexity. The other kind of pre-tragic sex is the religions that say that sex is negative. It's also pre-tragic. It's also clear. It's clear, it's bad. It's clear, it's good. When you think you have total clarity, you're in pre-tragic. Pre-tragic is, it's all clear. There are no questions. We understand the whole map. Either it's all bad or it's all good, but it's pre-tragic. You're not in the tragic because you know exactly what to do or what not to do. Pre-tragic. Tragic is, oh my God, we have no sexual narrative. We don't know how to understand our own desire, right? We're dealing with, on the one hand, Me Too. On the other hand, split off desire. On the other hand, we're dealing with abuse. On the other hand, we're dealing with, monogamy is breaking down all over the country because they can't sustain desire. And we're dealing with a broken sexuality all over the world. We're dealing with cultures where people are having less and less sex because we can't actually understand why we're right. So this enormous complexity in which the narrative of desire breaks down. We don't have a story of desire equal to our experience. And there's utter, rampant, tragic confusion around sexing. No story that equals our sexuality. Tragic. And so we're in that place now in culture, tragic. Post-tragic would mean, let's tell a new story about sexuality.
Yeah.
Let's reimagine it.
While learning all of the lessons from the tragic, all of the very true points that all the Me Too movements, all of these other things are illuminating and shining a flashlight on some dark and vicious corners of what is possible out there. And so it's like, let's be aware of this and let's make the intentional choice as an act of will to move to incorporate and include all of that and transcend
into the post-tragic.
To the post-tragic.
And a big part of what you and I are doing, and one part of our lives is doing this phenomenology of Eros, with the center, with Christina, which is this, 12 volumes that retells the story of sexing. And that's a whole other conversation. But that means we're going to the post-tragic so that's pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic. I'm going to give one more example, just so we can feel and people can take it into their lives. Suffering. So pre-tragic is you haven't suffered. Or you've suffered, but your priest or rabbi or shaman or psychologist is telling you exactly why. Meaning there's clarity. You think you got it all worked out. You suffered because you sinned. You suffered because you attracted it into your life, right? New age version of the classical religious position. In other words, there's complete clarity. You suffer, either you haven't suffered as pre-tragic or you suffer and you don't have any question about it because you've got all the answers, whether it's fundamentalist New Age or fundamentalist religion.
Or would you say that also like pain in a way is always pre-tragic? It's just pain. It's just a kind of a stimulus, a sensation. Suffering is our response to pain, which always actually in the word itself, and this is like kind of being a little granular, but suffering, Shinzen Young, a kind of Zen practitioner. I had him on the podcast, and he distinguished between pain and suffering as pain being the sensation and suffering being our response and resistance to that pain, which inherently somehow contains a little bit of the tragic with it because there's some way in which we don't understand it. We're resisting it in a way.
That's beautiful. So one form of pre-tragic is I haven't suffered. Another form of pre-tragic is I've suffered, but actually, I know why. I think I know why, in quotation marks. Some theology, New Age or classical religious, explains me why. So I have clarity. Or I'm literally not even at the experience of suffering. I'm just pain. It's animal pain. And it's just there. It's pre-tragic. It hasn't moved through the depth of my consciousness and been articulated, right, as existential suffering. So three forms of pre-tragic. Tragic. Oh my God, now I realize I'm suffering. I'm moved from, in your image, from pain to suffering. I realize that the fundamentalist explanation of my suffering doesn't hold. No, God doesn't kill people who don't accept Christ in a particular way, or Jews who don't do it that, or Tibetan Buddhists who leave the lineage. No, not the way it works. All the explanations don't work. No, I didn't lose something precious to me because I attracted it into my life, as they told me in my New Age seminar. Actually, there's great mystery of suffering.
Yeah. Why? Fucking why?
And I'm willing to stay in the uncertainty. And I don't have any easy answer. And I'm living in the tragic. Right? That's the tragic. Post-tragic and suffering is not that I provide an answer, but post-tragic is this other very subtle, unimaginably beautiful realization where I realize I'm never going to remove the mystery. The mystery is always going to be there. But I know that the universe is a love story. I know we live in an intimate universe because if we didn't live in an intimate universe, there's no reason I would be upset by suffering.
Mm-hmm.
If the world wasn't fair, why am I upset that it's not fair? And it's the reason I feel the horror of suffering is because it is a love story. And anything that violates the love story, I know isn't as it should be. So I can't answer suffering. There's no answer. But I can reclaim the goodness of Eros. I can begin to celebrate again, right? People in my family who went through the Holocaust and then came to the United States, they didn't explain the Holocaust, but they re-embraced life.
Mm.
They said, you know what? The world is good, and it is true, and it is beautiful, and there's this mystery of suffering, and we refuse to give any pre-tragic explanation to it, but we're not gonna forget, but we're not gonna live in remorse. We're gonna cast out remorse, and we're gonna marry again, and we're gonna love again.
Mm.
We're gonna have children, and we're gonna write, and we're gonna create. So the re-embracing of life and the realization that the great uncertainty doesn't undo the certainty of life's goodness. And I begin to live the dream again while I hold the mystery, post-tragic. The greatest movement of enlightenment is the ability to move from tragic to post-tragic. And so that's, in some sense, love, what you've done this week with your dad.
Yeah.
You've moved from tragic into post-tragic. And I've actually, as a lot of us did, watched it happen all through the week.
Yeah, it was in real time.
I mean, and then we'll move deep into like the mystical and the Atlantis in this world in a minute. But I remember we landed, you got the call, you came downstairs, your face was stricken with pain. You could, right?
Yeah.
Right, stricken with pain. And you cried all through the week. And every time you cried for all the times you never cried before.
Yeah.
And you opened up gates crying because all the gates are closed. The gates of tears are never closed. And you literally modeled this movement from tragic to post-tragic. So, wow, deep bow, brother.
Yeah. It was this beautiful braid of grief and celebration and laughter that if I just rode that rainbow bridge, and continued to ride my grief and laughter and pain and sorrow and joy and memory, if I just continued to ride the bridge, it was going to take me all the way through the different levels.
It's gorgeous. And anyone who has unfinished business, and who doesn't have unfinished business, I do. Anyone can do this journey.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's not that you answer the tragic. That's where we get lost. It's like a medicine journey. There's a gate that if you go in that gate, you're lost. There's another gate where post-tragic.
Yeah. And having that story and being able to choose that story
right
was also another thing that emerged. It was like we have available to us, if we consider ourselves a multidimensional being, you reference Atman as Brahman in your very brief, terse description of the infinite and the many names of God, right? Which means that the God within mirrors the God without, the full God. And so when you really understand and feel all of those different threads and can actually get it in your body and feel the principle of correspondence, as the Hermeticists say, there's so much more that starts to just become available to you in choosing the story that you want. Because if you're in that multidimensional space, then there's stories at every different perspective. First of all, there's lateral stories, you could tell, which is two perspectives of the same thing. Plenty of studies of multiple eyewitnesses all seeing different things. It's the idea that no two people see the same movie because they're all seeing through their own prism of consciousness.
And the DNA actually communicates. There's a book by James Shapiro. The DNA communicates in the human being multiple story strands at the same time.
Yeah. And so the ability to choose your story and have some
Right.
solid stories that make sense, like pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic, and apply that, it helps you actually purify and clarify your story. And so much of the week was about that. It was about choosing a story that
Gorgeous.
actually wove through all of the multidimensionality of who we are, not bypassing, including all of the other stories, but saying, this is the story that I'm going to ride. And this is
Right.
the story of, it's all fucked up and it's all perfect. And it's a story that says we can hold paradox. And
Right.
so I'm able to do this, and it's not bypassing because I'm feeling all of the feelings, but this is the story that we're going to weave through. And that was really beautiful.
It's gorgeous, right? And it's everything. And you just actually stunningly recapitulated so much of the week, right? In other words, we try and resolve the contradiction. And what we've been saying all week is Aristotle's law of the excluded middle says work out the contradiction. We're doing deeper wisdom. We're doing the wisdom of paradox. And we're saying that the Garden of Eden is not paradise, it's paradox. And post-tragic is about paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that right? So the tragic is you're lost in the contradiction. You try and get out of the contradiction by going back to the pre-tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work. And so you don't know where to go. So you just basically turn off your joy. And so many people, you just look and the glint is not in their eye. And the gate's not in their step. And you can't feel because somehow the contradiction deadened them. And they were right to catch the contradiction and their own integrity, their goodness, not their, I can't resolve the contradiction. I can't. No, but you can go to paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Paradox is post-tragic. And as you said, as we said, we don't bypass, but we're actually trembling before she in amazing joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the gift that we want to offer to each other right now and to anyone is there's a road to the post-tragic.
Yeah.
And the post-tragic doesn't require any giving up of integrity. It's actually the highest integrity. I don't give up my true uncertainty. I dance in the uncertainty, but I reclaim the utter fucking certainty of the unimaginable goodness of life. Cha. Okay. So I want to see if we can, we're in the blessing of the Father this week. So
Yep.
let's go kind of wide and personal at the same time.
Yep.
So I want to offer you something and tell me how it resonates, in terms of an ancient kind of mystery Atlantis kind of text about your dad, who, when we went into the house, you saw that he was deep into all sorts of very serious explorations. We saw books on prayer and books on different esoteric spiritual paths. And he clearly was, and there's lots of information that you have on this for 20 years that we talked about. He was clearly trying to, in the language of the lineage, he was trying to enter the garden.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Pardes, right? The Pardes, the great orchard, the garden. And there's an old text. It's one of my most beloved texts. And, I laugh and cry whenever I read it. It's in Tractate Chagiga 16a, that particular tome in the 3rd century, 4th century Aramaic texts. And it says, 4 entered the orchard. 4, the 4 masters. 1 went insane. A 2nd died young, right? A 3rd betrayed his faith. And the 4th, Akiva, entered in peace and left in peace. And it's like a journey. And I remember sitting with my dear friend of the last few years of his life, Richard Alpert Ramdas, and I was with him in his room a bunch of years back before he passed in 2005. And he said to me, so many of my friends knew how to get in, but they couldn't get out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I shared this text with them. Your father was in the orchard. He had found his way in. I mean, he had enormous heart and depth and penetration. And I offer this with such tenderness. So it's not that he was lost exactly. He wasn't in delusion. He had actually found his way into the garden. But in the garden, it seems like so tenderly, he couldn't find his way out.
Mm-hmm.
How does that feel with you? And you just, and throw it out, delete it. But I'm offering it as a way to begin to feel into this and to liberate the Father.
Yeah. Certainly my father had found his way in. And I think what is coming through me now is that he found his way in, and then he knew that there was a place that he was looking for that was real.
Yeah.
There was a place that he was looking for that was real. But the place that he was looking for that was real wasn't good enough. So he actually said, in some ways, he discarded actually the real garden and went deeper looking for an illusory garden, a garden in his mind that would give him access to the type of information and experience that an unintegrated part of him wanted. Right? So he was in the garden, and he could make his way out of that garden, but that garden wasn't quite good enough. And in some ways, so, is just as he wasn't quite good enough for himself. The garden wasn't quite good enough for him either. And both were actually inextricable. There was a not quite good enough quality to it. So he was going in and says, no, I want a better garden. I want a garden where I have access to even more information and access to even more. And so he actually went past the garden. This is what I feel.
Yeah.
He went past the garden into the dark forest, which is no longer the garden anymore. It's almost like it goes all the way around to the upside down garden.
So this is deep. This is deep love. This is deep, brethren. This is really a conversation between two mystics about how we describe, right? We're now trying to give language and we're trying to trace Michael with honor, right? To liberate him from loneliness. So I'm gonna share with you and I think we're saying something very, very similar. We're using a different way of, so when you go into the garden, you've actually found your way in. There's a way in which when you want more, right, you can't receive the blessing of what you've received and let it bring you back into the world. So then the garden itself draws you deeper and deeper in, and you can't find your way back. In Zen Buddhism, the 10th ox herding picture is when the master turns and goes back to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a place in which the garden keeps drawing you in, and the garden becomes the dark forest, which you're describing, right? So we're describing the same thing in a slightly different phenomenology, which is how you get, by the way, different mysticisms, but it's the same.
Right.
We're describing the same phenomenology. It became somehow the dark forest, and you could see by the writings he left in the house that he was convinced it was the garden.
Correct.
Right? Now that he was, but it wasn't, but it was lost. That's what we mean by kind of lost in the garden. And Akiva, who's in the lineage of Solomon, he's holding the lineage of Akiva, he nichnas b'shalom. He enters in peace, v'yatsa b'shalom. He actually is able to leave the garden and take everything with him back to the marketplace. It's like, So let's see if we can just, for the sake of liberating the Father, and for the sake of offering a path, if we can make this distinction, which is really, really important. It's not enough to hear voices. And as I can hear voices, and the voices are real, and my therapist will tell me the voices aren't real, but I know my therapist is wrong. I know the voices are real, and I'm right. The voices are real, but the voices being real is insufficient. Right? It's not enough that the voices are real. It's why in the lineage, there's a prophet and a beautiful but false prophet. And sometimes within one person, there's a real prophet and a false prophet in the same person. And false prophet means not bad person, means I hear voices, but there's a hermeneutic prism.
Love that word.
Right? Hermes, God of interpretation. So I have an experience, but I think that experience yields this conclusion, but I don't realize that I'm actually interpreting the experience. So my experience is real. Therapy tells me it's not real. Modern materialist society tells me it's not real, but I know it's fucking real. And I'm right. What I don't realize is that actually there's a hermeneutic prism of interpretation that's happening inside of me that's reading the experience in a particular way. And this is, and I'm going to pass this to you, brother, this is where psychics and mediums and different masters of the occult that are actually holding true gifts, that are having real experiences, but actually can also do great damage because they think that they're actually transmitting the reading or the message, and they're unaware of the fact that there's a prism of interpretation that goes through their ego and their complexity and their own dark forest.
Yeah.
Wow.
This discussion has come up, and this is my general aversion to psychics and mediums, with certain exceptions where someone has passed through the crucible where I actually trust their prism.
Right.
And Paul Selig being one of the many-time podcast guests, I actually trust that not only is the signal true, but actually his prism is clear. And so the words that he speaks, they reverberate through my whole body like I was a drum that was tightly wound, or a flute that was made by a master craftsman, so that the reverberation through the reed is just perfect. And I feel it, I feel it in my body. And other times there's been psychics who've been incredibly accurate, but actually their prism of interpretation has left little minds, little broken glass shards that, I'm going to step on along my way because they've implanted certain beliefs and certain ways that they've interpreted things.
That get embedded in my leg, that piece of glass.
Right.
That gets infected.
Yes. And so that's, as a general, that's a huge caveat, and one of the reasons why
it's hugely
typically
important.
I take it with a very kind of explorer's skeptic mind, where I almost intentionally don't let anything in.
And you're very practiced, love. It's very hard for a person to do that. So when people ask me or ask you, when people say to me, okay, I was at this psychic, I was at this medium, I say, wait, right? In other words, yes, they may be a beautiful person. Let's even give them that. They may be hearing real voices, but there's a prism of interpretation that's not trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important to realize in our culture today, right? The mediums are getting mad. They're I can't losing the round. Right?
They're like, and now you can't speak.
We claim voice, right? And this is so important for people to know, because I can't tell you the amount of people I've talked to over the years who had an experience with a psychic or with a medium who were good people.
Yeah.
But actually they said something that they thought was direct transmission, which was actually interpretation. And then that actually affected the vector of the person's entire life.
Yeah.
So in some sense, and let's take this to the next step because it's so big. The medium, the psychic, the channel is looking to hear the God voice. And we go to the medium, the psychic, and channel because we think that that's a way to access the God voice, but we're responsible to disambiguate the God voice.
Yeah.
That's a huge sentence. In other words, we reject the materialist modern culture that says there's no God voice. So the materialist culture says, no, there's no God voice, and look at the mistake they made there, and look at the mistake. No, there is a God voice.
Yeah, it's all schizophrenia.
It's all schizophrenia. No, the God voice is real. The God voice is ultimately real in the eye of the spirit, and the eye of consciousness, and the eye of the heart, and the eye of contemplation, which are epistemological disclosures, real gnosis. It's real. And it goes through a prism of interpretation.
Yeah. I think about my dad, and if he would have had one piece of what we call amongst us the dharma, and the dharma is like the unfuckable truth.
Right.
Like it's almost like a perennial philosophy, but it's an evolving perennial philosophy.
We call it an evolving perennialism. That's a big sense. We'll bracket it's a big one.
But it's something that's like, and one of those is there's certain things that the God voice just won't tell you. Right. At least as far as I understand it. Now maybe that evolves, but the God voice isn't going to tell you which way the stock market's going to go, which way the futures market's going to go, which way this is going to happen, who's going to win the next Bulls game or the next, Jets game or whatever the thing is. It's not going to tell you that.
And when it pretends to, be careful.
Be careful. And the reason why it can't is because if it did, then it would be denying all of the individual sovereign actors who are making individual sovereign choices that are actually creating and co-creating that reality and allowing this game to actually flourish, allowing this to be real. So if my father would have had that, that would have been, he would have said, well, this voice can't be real because it's trying to tell me things. And there would have been some checks and balances. So
yeah,
he entered that that kind of dangerous part of the garden, but without simple principles of like, it'd be like entering a war zone without basic principles of combat, entering a jungle without basic principles of poisonous plants and dangerous animals.
So this
he like didn't have like the explorer's guide
right.
to the garden, to the dark forest.
Right. And this is, and maybe, as you know, our dear friend David J. Temple, who we haven't yet introduced to people, but who's a great writer, is going to be, sharing in the world in about 6-8 weeks, right? This first book on evolving perennialism, what we're calling the Dharma. So maybe when that book comes out, we'll talk to David. Maybe we'll see if we can have that conversation about that book. But so evolving perennialism, what we mean by that, by the Dharma, is huge. But for now, let's just stay with the Dharma. When we say the Dharma, what we mean is that we live in a story of value that's real. It's not just made up. There's actually a plot line to Cosmos. And that story of value is rooted in what we call, here's the quote, a story of value rooted in evolving first principles and first values, end quote, which is actually a map of reality, but not a fundamentalist map that removes all the uncertainty and says there's no mystery, but actually, as you said really beautifully, I love the phrase, an explorer's guide, right? In other words, it actually allows you to orient yourself to get your bearings, right, in the field of value. So that's a big conversation, which is huge and gorgeous. And hopefully in 6-8 weeks, if we can find David J. Temple, I'm excited to announce that he's putting out that book, and we'll talk about that. So but let me get back to kind of the psychic and your dad and Lost in the Garden and voices that are real. And our obligation, when we were in the journey to medicine, we kept hearing the voice, purify, clarify. And the two voices I was hearing was purify, clarify, and all in for all life. And we were whispering to each other, purify, clarify, all in for all life. Purify, clarify, all in for all life.
It was like a mantra.
It was like a mantra, right? And it was just, and we were sitting so close to each other and we just felt those words going back and forth. And so, can I tell you a story, like a crazy story?
Please.
It's like a crazy story. This is unimaginable. And we're going to just try trembling before she to lay something down here that's unimaginable. So the most famous story about the God voice in Western history, Kierkegaard, the great Christian theologian, wrote a book about it called Fear and Trembling. All the great traditions refer to it: Islam, Christianity, Christendom, and of course, Hebraicism, is the story of Abraham, who's commanded by God in the 22nd chapter of the book of Genesis to sacrifice his son. This is the Father and the Son. That's what we're doing this week. This is the Father and the Son. The entire book of Genesis is about the blessing of the Father. And when you came downstairs on Saturday night and you were grief-stricken, and then your grief went into me, and I actually didn't know what to say. We didn't actually have words until the next morning. And I walked downstairs and we sat on the couch and looked at each other. And the words that came down were blessing of the Father. And then we just together plunged into the blessing of the Father. So now let's honor the lineage. The place that it incepted in me is deep in the lineage. When you really read the book of Genesis, the source text of Western civilization, it's about the blessing of the Father. Adam, 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Who gets the blessing of the Father? How do you learn to get the blessing of the Father? Noah, 3 children, Shem, Ham, and Yefet. Who knows how to get the blessing of the Father? Abraham, who's the son of Terach. He leaves his father, has a son, Isaac. Isaac wants the blessing of the Father. Isaac's going to have 2 sons. Who gets the blessing of the Father? Jacob has 12 children. Who gets the blessing of the Father? The entire story, right, of the book of Genesis is about the blessing of the Father. What is the blessing of the Father? How is it transmitted? When does the Son need to come liberate the blessing from the Father. When's the Father able to transmit it? It's all about the blessing of the Father. And we all yearn for the blessing of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So Isaac wants the blessing of the Father. And his father says, hey, son, let's go on a camping trip. And Isaac says, great. Maybe I'll get the blessing of the Father. And there's a donkey and there's a couple of assistants, and they go to Mount Moriah and they ascend the mountain. And the text begins in chapter 22, and God tested Abraham. And God said to Abraham, this is the text, God said to Abraham, "Kachnat bincha et yichidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak." Take your son, your only son, the son that you love, Isaac, v'halehu sham la'olah, and raise him up there as a sacrifice, al echad ha'arim, on one of the mountains, which I'm going to show you. Abram's like, fuck, God voice, right? And the tradition usually reads this, Maimonides, clear God voice. How can you, prophecy is absolutely clear, says Maimonides. You would never go sacrifice your son if the God voice didn't tell you. And so he takes him up the mountain and he lays him out there on the slab of the rock and he raises his hand. It's an incredible text that we read on the new year in the lineage. And he's got a knife in his hand and he's about to slaughter his son. And the voice of the angel says, Al tashlich yadcha hanar, don't stretch your hand forth against the boy, right? Abraham steps back. He sees a ram, sacrifices the ram instead. That's the story. And the story's always read as the absolute clarity of the God voice. Abram has to sacrifice his son. Kierkegaard, right, speaking for Christianity, says this is the teleological suspension of the ethical in front of the overpowering God voice. That's the old religion.
Mm-hmm.
And now we got to reread this text.
Yeah.
This text is, oh my God. And I understand the text. Anyone who sent a child to war knows I moved to Israel, knowing my children would join the army. An incredibly painful decision.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, I put them in danger. They both entered special forces in the army and their lives were at risk all the time. So we do sometimes have an ideal and a value for which we're willing to put ourselves and our children at risk. And it's a very painful text.
Mm-hmm.
And the text is obviously not a model, but it becomes the center of the old religion. So I want to share something crazy with you and then turn it back to you and your story and this week. So there's an unimaginably secret hidden text in the Solomon lineage, which says, the text says, and God tested Abraham. So the Zohar, page 120, Aramaic says, da yetzer hara, God is the evil inclination. The Zohar says that God voice wasn't God. He heard it wrong. He couldn't clarify the prism. And the Zohar's words are almost the exact words you used, brother. Aspaklaria de lo nahara. It was an unclear prism.
Mm-hmm.
So actually the test wasn't, will you sacrifice your son and be obedient to God?
Right.
The test was, will you take responsibility to disambiguate the God voice and realize that voice in your head that's telling you to sacrifice your son, motherfucker, isn't God.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so Abraham is liberated when he actually realizes, oh my God, that wasn't the God voice.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go one more step and then it's all yours. So what voice was it? And it gets really personal and intimate. And I say this with like mad love and honor. And it's a trembling moment. So if you read carefully in the hidden lineage, you come across a story, a text that says that Abraham's father takes Abraham to the god king Nimrod and offers Abraham up as a sacrifice. He's thrown into a fiery fire and only emerges by a miracle, but his father goes to sacrifice him. So what is Abraham doing? Freud, repetition compulsion. He's going to do to his son what his father did to him.
Yeah.
So he thinks it's the God voice. It's actually the voice of the father that lives in his head repetition compulsion, and it's Abraham's call as a prophet king to disambiguate the God voice and say, no, that's the voice of Father I'm not taking with me. I'm going to find my own way to the God voice, and God's telling me not to sacrifice the son. That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that arise, but I want to just take it to the personal because
Take it to the personal.
There's an unfinished loop from, our last series of conversations that we had before, day 3 and 4 of the Shiva. And I think it was on day 4 when we recorded. And it was an opportunity for me to give my father the full forgiveness.
Yeah.
And this is bringing me right back to that point because I always believed that my father had a choice, and I couldn't ever really let that go. That, Dad, you had a choice. You had a choice to disambiguate from that voice and to understand that that voice was the false voice. That voice was driving you away from everything that you love, everything that clearly he loved. His house was filled with all of the games we used to play when I was a kid. I mean, so all the dice, actually only one dice, but all the cards, all the Scrabble, all the Boggle, everything that was there, that was like everything that he really loved. And even cigars. My dad knew that I loved cigars. We told the story of when Uncle Dave, I loved cigars so much, even before I was even allowed to have cigars.
Right.
I love cigars so much. Uncle Dave, my father's brother, got me a theatrical beard so I could go into the humidor myself and get cigars. My dad never liked cigars, but he had a box of cigars.
Cha.
And it was like he craved, and I was there the whole time, but he couldn't actually make the choice to choose to disambiguate. And that's where I found him and I judged him guilty. And that's where it's been difficult for me to forgive. And now, the story that I can tell now, which offers the forgiveness, is only possible after this week of 8 days of miracles.
Right.
Where I can say, Dad, I fucking forgive you. I forgive you because this week happened. And this week was so special. It was, in many ways, the greatest 8 days of my life. The greatest 8 days of my life.
Wow.
Filled with all of every emotion, every pain, every joy, every laughter, every reconnection, new things emerging, this opportunity to offer this as we're doing now, share this, open source it. And so I can ride a story from a different octave and say, Dad, yeah, maybe you did have a choice, but actually maybe there was an even higher force that was riding through you. And that was leading you right to this moment right here where everything is redeemed by this choice and through this choice that we've made to honor you and bring you into your fullness, that everything was perfect, Dad. So I forgive you, Dad. I fully forgive you because we've made the choice to fully redeem, And that's what was needed. The whole completion of this week in its perfect fucked upness.
And you couldn't do that a week ago, brother.
I couldn't do that a week ago.
When I asked you a week ago to forgive him.
But I can do that now, and I can do that with clear heart.
For real,
and say, I forgive you, Dad.
Oh my God.
I forgive you.
Wow. And you're saying two huge things. 3. One is the story of the binding of Isaac, the way we're rereading it for world religion, says we're radically responsible to disambiguate the God voice. That's part 1. But here's part 2. And sometimes we can't. Right? And that sometimes we can't that you just spoke, that is the post-tragic. The tragic is when we think we could have done it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tragic we didn't. But then we have this realization that you just spoke. If I could try and put it into words, every place we've been, we needed to be.
Yeah.
And you said at at the funeral really beautifully. And that was the beginning where just you could feel it shifting in you. Who am I to say that it could have been any different?
Yeah. I caught myself.
Right? And who am I to say, right? And there's this place, and there's a way that we can feel this in realization. In some sense, anything that's about to happen, we have a choice in. Anything that's about to happen, we have choice of some level. We can disambiguate the God voice. We can choose. But once it's already happened, and death tells us it's past,
Yeah.
then we realize, actually, couldn't have been any different. Paradox,
Mm-hmm.
not contradiction. And so you can, wow, right? Right? And so, wow, it's like we're totally responsible, right? To be Abraham and to disambiguate the God voice and take responsibility for the God voice. And once it's already happened, every place you've been, you needed to be.
Yeah. And I could feel, so many of the other mourners there, who are close to my father, his best friend, Craig Dinkle.
Craig.
And so many other people. Another one was Howard, another one of his good friends. Like, they could see the tragic of man, like everything Michael ever wanted was right there before him. He could watch his son, and he loved me so fucking much.
Yeah.
He could have watched his son flourish in the way that I've flourished, and to feel that and to be right there with me, through this whole process. Like, heaven was there, and they saw the tragic. And I think they got a glimpse of the post-tragic through me as they saw me step into the post-tragic of, yeah, you're right, Craig, and you're right, Howard, and that's true, and it's all perfect. And I can't say that I would have changed it, because I can't see with perfect clarity which way would have been better ultimately for the course of destiny, my life, for humanity, that's still a mystery. Like, the mystery is called a mystery for a reason.
That's right, it's hidden.
And I'm choosing to believe that there was a mystery that was hidden, that was so deep that actually it was fucking perfect. And in there lies the redemption, and lies the liberation and the full forgiveness.
And lies the seed of the new world religion. See, in the old religion, we said there's a mystery, and therefore we don't act. There's a mystery, and therefore we can just be obedient. There's a mystery, therefore we give up human agency and responsibility. We're saying, no. In this new world religion that comes out of the deepest lineages of all the ancients, and yet weaves together the best of sciences and evolutionary sciences and all the technologies of shamanism, we actually realize anything that's in the future, anything that's from this second on, we are fully fucking responsible. We are on the court. We are not in the stands, right? We hear the God voice. It's our responsibility to disambiguate the God voice. That's the Abraham story, and it's mine to do. But once it's already happened, we then rest in the mystery. We rest in that moment has died. And then we realize, and the lineage calls this, it's hidden, it's nowhere in the public text, calls it Shechina Ila'ah. The higher goddess is the realization that in some ultimate sense, it couldn't be any different than it was. But not as a future position, not a position on the future. It's a position on recovering the past. And that moves us to the pre-tragic. I literally watched people walk into your house, Aubrey, all week, and they thought they were coming to visit you in the tragic. Wow, we got to come visit, right? Your father's friends, your friends, you're right. But all of a sudden they came into the house and they weren't in the pre-tragic, but they weren't in the tragic. Something else was happening. It was post-tragic. And post-tragic was, this is what was. There's goodness. There's mystery. And we can hold the mystery together.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, there's the reflex response is, I'm sorry for your loss. It's like what everybody believes that they need to say. And actually, Christian, who's in this room, got that didn't really land for me, because yes, of course.
Right.
Of course. Like, I'm sorry for your loss. Like, yes. And thank you. Like, thank you for that blessing, actually, and that act of compassion to be sorry for my loss. And also, it's true, but partial. And so actually, Christian came to me and said, I'm grateful for your gain.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I was like, that's it, my man. Like,
That's
it. That's the story that I'm choosing to ride. And it doesn't negate
That's
that
right.
I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm also grateful for your gain. And both need to be expressed for actually that sentiment for me to actually receive it. Because I wasn't going to get sucked back into the tragic when I was finding the post-tragic. I felt the tragic, believe me, even all the way up to the, I had a moment of this. So Vailana's doing her sound healing it was just this unbelievable, sound bowls and voice and channeling, the spirit of that one particular moment.
Stunning.
And I was drawn through actually no intention of mine other than to tell something to the sound guy, which needed to happen to close the ceremony down. And it just occurred to me, but actually he already knew, and I didn't really need to go there. But as I was walking, I saw the table of all of the photos that we had put out, of framed photos of me and my father in different stages of his life. And I just started weeping, like deep, deep, deep tears as I looked through every single photo. And I was feeling the tragedy of my father, Michael Phillips Marcus, of everything we missed, of everything that he missed, the tragedy of it all. And then I found one photo of him where it was just his full presence, his smile. And I found it and I just locked onto it. And I could feel him there with me now in the perfection of that moment. And I just started to smile and I just said, "We did it, Dad.
We did it, Dad." That's it was right then. I was right when I walked. I remember exactly. Oh, wow.
We did it, Dad.
We did it, Dad. And does everyone, just to like share with everyone, any place, wherever we are, you're not saying, we're not saying, this new dharma, is not saying, as long as your dad was alive, you could not say, it would be a violation to say, "Dad, we're yours where you need to be."
Yeah.
You had to reach out in any way you could and keep hoping.
Yeah.
And if action was impossible, then you pray, or you send just a few months before, you send an email trying to find us. You have to do everything you can do as long as it's still in play.
Yeah.
But then when the moment comes to pass, when death comes, you can either go into the tragic and the bitterness of it, or you can actually, it's not just that you're choosing a better story. There is a better story. It's actually a more accurate story. And the more accurate story is, every place you've been, you needed to be. And you can feel it. You can feel it in your body.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, no, I can't actually say it could have been different. And until the moment of death, you can't say that. Until it's past. As long as there's a play to be made, we're on the field. The second there's no play to be made, our whole perspective transmutes and transfigures. And medicine gives you that realization.
Mm-hmm.
And so does dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from only a logical conceptual perspective, that's a contradiction. What do you mean? But from a deeper perspective, that's paradox.
And when you live it, you can
feel it.
You can live the resolution of the contradiction and the acceptance of that paradox.
Every place you've been, you needed to be.
As Hafiz said, wherever you are right now, God circled that place on a map for you.
For you. And it couldn't be any different. So I want to ask you one more question, love, about the blessing of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So let's stay with Abraham and Isaac. So we're in this deep lineage, and we're recovering this lineage and from the past and moving it into the memory of the future, and we're enacting this new world religion as a context for diversity coming out of this blessing of the Father. So Isaac is there. Let's move from Abraham. We've been looking at Abraham. Now let's shift the lens. Let's look at Isaac. He's laying there. He sees his father, and he sees madness in his father's eyes. So Isaac is the son who sees madness in his father's eyes. And I'm thinking about you and your father. I'm thinking about my father now.
Mm.
And I'm thinking about anyone who's ever seen madness in their mother or father's eyes. And that can be just when they lose their temper and there's madness for a moment and it's imprinted on you. And it could be deeper and longer. So there's Isaac. He's laying back. He sees his father holding a knife, metaphorically, mystically, archetypally, and he can't cry. And so the lineage records in a hidden text then in that moment, tears of angels fell in his eyes. Tears of angels fell in his eyes. In Israel, the song Tears of Angels, taken from this text, is a major song in the culture of the country. Now, stay with me just for a second, just a little lineage story. So the lineage doesn't tell us about these tears of angels when they happen, meaning in chapter 22 of the book of Genesis, when the binding of Isaac's story is told, there's no mention of tears of angels. It's only, and no one needs any background to get this. It's just, you can just, 5 chapters later, chapter 27, when Isaac is older, Vahiki zaken Yitzchak, Isaac is older, now he's about to have children. Now he has children. He has to choose which son to bless. So it says, Vatichena einav mirot. Isaac's vision is blurred. He can't see well. So the lineage says, why can't he see well? And it's hidden text. The lineage says, because the tears of angels fell in his eyes back then. So tears of angels means trauma. Trauma. So the trauma, which is so painful that he couldn't even cry, so angels cry for him. So that trauma, those tears of angels, they blur his eyes and stop him from doing right action in the world. And so here's a wild, deep question for you, brother, for me, for you, but for all of us, and through you for all of us. And it's a question we need to address in this new context, this new story of value. Therapy has its answer. When do we need to go back and cry the tears of angels? And when do we need to move on? That's such a huge question. When is it critical? God, I need to do that therapy again. I need to do that process again. I need to go into the darkness again. And when do I need to get up and roar and act and be a lion? Right? And so the text almost suggests, as long as you're living your life, Isaac is very successful. He goes through 5 chapters of success. Tears of angels, trauma doesn't affect him. But then he's got to create a new lineage. He's got to give the blessing of the Father. He's about to become, right? Imagine you're about to become a father.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all the tears I didn't cry, those tears of angels, when they cried for me, do I need to go back and cry them myself in order to clear my vision? So how does that feel, brother? Wow.
Yeah, I actually have a very clear answer to that, which is a very complex question and it's a very beautiful question. The challenge is that we don't know when we have to cry those tears. We just don't always know.
Right.
And sometimes there's another question of, okay, I know I need to cry the tears. I don't know how to cry the tears. But the answer is the same in that you go through a process that will evoke and call forth whatever is left there to be that hasn't been cried, anything that you haven't expressed. So the processes that I'm thinking of course, there are the medicine journeys, which can do that. But there's 2 non-medicine, everything is medicine, right? But non-psychedelic as far as a plant or a substance processes, and that's breath work and the sweat lodge or temescal. Whenever I do breath work, I am often surprised that there are wells of tears that are there. And sometimes they have a story, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just locked in my soma somewhere and they just emerge as the breath fills my body and the hyperoxygenation takes off my ordinary consciousness of perception, kind of melts the walls where these pockets of trauma and these uncried tears live. And they just pour forth. And sometimes they have a story, sometimes they don't. Yeah. And in the lodge, door 3, which is, often an hour and a half, 2 hours in, you've been sweating, you've been praying, you've been, listening to the drum and the smoke and the sweetgrass and the sage and the cedar and the copal or whatever your tradition of lodge that you sit in, you'll find something there if it's there. And to me, that's been the way that I've actually known. It's not that my cognitive mind says, I think there's some more tears there, because I don't know. But I just put myself in a position where if there are tears, I'll melt away all of the walls that keep me from seeing it, all of the parts of my prism that are obscured. And then whatever needs to come forth will come forth. So having those is like a regular check and balance to the practice where you have something that you can do. And there is, nothing, absolutely no reason why you can't do breath work frequently. I don't care what, AA 12-step program or whatever you want. Nobody says you shouldn't breathe.
Breathing is good.
Nobody says that. And so to me, like breath work becomes one of these crucial practices to bring in like into this world religion, into these ideas, because it'll allow you to actually find out what's there. And it's not the only one, but it's just like the clearest, no hesitation. I recommend this universally. Do those shamanic breathwork practices to see what might be there. Is it rage that's there? Is it tears that's there? What's left that's been repressed that needs to be expressed?
No, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I love every word you said, and I just want to be in it with you for a second. One of the primary texts of this New World religion is the texts of laughter and silence and tears. And let's focus on tears for a second. Tears are a text. There's a language of tears. Tears have a voice. And what you're saying is that, and there's a deep, deep truth, is you can't just wait for tears to happen to you. You have to actually practice to invite the tears and give them space.
Amen.
And breath work and medicine, but you're focusing on breath work and sweat lodge.
Yeah.
Are a practice that invites the tears.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful and so wildly important. It's one of these places, again, that we meet, so beautifully. We've never talked about this before.
No.
Right? And it's beautiful. I wrote a book on tears. It's actually on Amazon, although it shouldn't be there because we're going to reissue it because it was badly edited. So if anyone buys it, I apologize for the editing. There'll be another, but it's about tears. It's about 12 different forms of tears. And I missed this breathwork sweat lodge thing. So actually, in the new edition, we'll have to. I want to cite you on that. I didn't have access to that as a practice. That's really beautiful.
Yeah,
it's really beautiful. Tears clarify us.
They do,
right?
They do.
I mean, tears. One of my masters whispered in my ear from the 16th century. He talks about the tears from below, which is the feminine waters, the feminine wetness, and the masculine, right, expression of kind of the sticky tears from below. And then he says, then there's the tears from above, which he calls, if I translate literally, the semen of the eyes, the wetness of the eyes. I mean, it's an incredible Chaim Vital, the major student of Luria, 16th century, and Safed by the Sea of the Galilee. And he says, it's the eros of tears. And that tears matter so much. Right? So like, when do we go back? This question we started with, when do we go back and cry tears of angels? And so, Aubrey, part of what you're saying is you have to have a regular practice to evoke tears. And again, it's a wonderful place to meet. I've said to my students all through the years that you have to keep a tears journal. To keep a journal of tears and give the tears voice. Tears is such a beautiful word, right? Tears in English is it tears something open, but tears not in a bad way. It opens the space.
And often until you've cried, you don't actually see that you needed to cry or why you were crying.
Right.
It's like it almost wipes away your lens of perception. It
clarifies
all of the obscurity, all of the obfuscation of and the opacity of your prism actually moves out through the liquid of your eyes, and then you can see clearly, and then you go, "Oh my God, I needed that."
And just like this is a wild thing that's gorgeous. Just like in sexing, we're working together on this phenomenology of eros where we chart 7 levels of sexing. And no, we're not going to talk about that now. There's 12 forms of tears, but that's not just being clever, right? If a person just cries, just like medicine needs dharma and dharma needs medicine, tears need dharma. And so, just for example, the molecular structure and pattern of tears that come from different experiences are different.
Mm.
It's like, wow. When you actually look at pictures of the tears, they're literally different. And so each time I cry, it's telling me a story. Tears are a prism of revelation, but they're utterly personal.
Yeah. That's
right?
beautiful.
It's beautiful. And yeah, like, wow. And I don't think there's anything more beautiful than for people to cry together. And crying can be ecstatic crying. You can make love with ecstatic tears. And crying can be broken crying, and crying can be crying of liberation. But so at a different time, we're not gonna get seduced there now, but we'll talk more about tears. But tears are so important in a world religion where the text is the text of your own tears. The text lives in you. You are the sacred text, and your laughter and your tears and your holy and broken hallelujah is the text of your sacred autobiography. So let's see if we can go back and see if we can wrap this piece, which is unwrappable, and conclude this piece, which can't be concluded. So I'm going to ask you the question one more time. We're just going to go back and forth one more time. Just tell you a little story, not from a text. I was thinking about this Tears of Angels text many years ago, and we actually did a show on it, in my kind of Israel television, kind of Oprah stage when we were doing this show, which was very beautiful, right? It's a beautiful context, and I miss the joy of connecting to a country. There's a great joy in it. And you're supposed to be embarrassed by having a joy in it, but actually it was one of the most enjoyable things I ever did. You can feel like you can talk to a country. And I think it's very much what you're doing on a podcast, right? The gorgeousness of just feeling this deep connection with people, and we get to love each other. So we were in that stage, and I had just finished giving a talk someplace in Jerusalem about this show we did on Tears of Angels. And I had a Diet Coke in my hand. No, I never drink Diet Coke, but I happen to have one in my hand.
Weird.
Right, there we go. And I had my ring of keys, right, which had, the keys to my apartment. I didn't drive still then or now because I always get lost in thought and wind up crashing into things, which was bad. So I'm walking with these group of students who are beautiful people, and they would always walk me afterwards to the bus. And I got my Diet Coke and I got my keys in my hand. And we passed one of those big dumps, huge, like green dumps filled with garbage. And I throw my Diet Coke can and the keys going with it.
Oh, boy.
Now, none of the students noticed. So I'm like, okay, fuck. Do I go on and kind of save dignity and humiliation and just get another fucking set of keys? Right? Or do I go look in this trash dump to find the keys? And all of a sudden I realized, oh, that's the question of Tears of Angels. And so when do I need to go into the dump and turn it over and look for the keys to my life? Because those are the keys to my house and I can't get in. And when do I not? And so this goes through my mind. I said, okay, it's a sign from she. I tell them I lost my keys. They look at me, try and suppress, laughter, knowing that I'm going to have to turn over. So I turn over this dump and I'm looking for these keys. 10 minutes go by, couldn't find them. And then the bus comes. And then this other thought occurs to me. Oh, okay, I've looked. I've done the best I can. When's the time to stop looking and get on the bus? Right? And I think what you say is very wise, which is, brother, there's no easy formula. Right? Easy formula is kind of old fundamentalisms. It's a deeply personal decision, but you've got to be weighing that. You got to be in that conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
Because until I feel a feeling through to completion, it will hijack the story of my life. So Tears of Angels, right? And so Isaac doesn't get the blessing of the father until he can kind of cry the tears of angels, and then he can go and liberate the father. And then he can actually find Abraham. That's what happens at the end of his life. Isaac actually finds Abraham. He liberates the father, and the father and the son come together, and something's transformed. Wow. Blessing of the father.
Blessing of the father.
Blessing of the father. Wow. Let's see if we can go one more step. You up for it?
I'm up for it.
Up for it. Okay. We're at the memorial service, right? Together. What was it? 2 days ago? And we're not going to be able to talk about this way in a week because this is the moment. This is the time. And we talked about this incredible other cornerstone of a world religion, which is confession. But in the old religion, confession was confession of sin. I fucked up. Confess your sin. Let's get clear. Sin can be a bad form of sin, right? Meaning a pathological form of sin offered by a distorted God voice. You had sex you shouldn't have, right? You self-pleasured you shouldn't have. That's the kind of sin we can do without. We need to leave those voices behind, right? The voices that denied human aliveness.
Mm-hmm. Voices that were not all in for all life.
That were not all in for all life and that didn't disambiguate the God voice.
Yeah.
And sin also can mean, in the original Hebrew, to miss the mark, la'achtia tamatara. And so sin can also be, wow, I fucked up. I can recognize I fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. But at the center of the new world religion as a context for our diversity, we need a different kind of confession. And it's what we've talked about deeply before, to confess your greatness. Can I confess my greatness? And that's huge. And actually, in the lineage, the place that confession comes online is when the person comes to Jerusalem, they come before the priest shaman, and they say, Asiti kechol asher tzivitani, I've done it perfectly. Perfectly. And the shaman says, you've done it perfectly. It says, Asiti, I've done it perfectly. And the lineage says that's confession. So confession is the only thing that actually obligates me in the world. The only thing that is my real confession is not, I'm a worm. I confess I'm a worm. What does anyone want from a worm? I confess my greatness. And where do I find my greatness? And I'm going to ask you to give me one example of this, just to model it for people, because it's not an easy thing to do. It takes a kind of holy audacity to do it. So I'm going to put you on the spot in about a second, so get ready, okay? So to confess my greatness means...
I'm pretty comfortable in the spot.
You're doing okay. You're doing okay. You're doing okay, brother. Oh my God, right? As you do. I love you mad. So to confess my greatness is to find the place where I was at my best.
Hmm.
And there's one lineage master, Abraham Cook, who says it so beautifully. He says, who are you? He says, Amitat mahuti mitgale berig'ei gadluti. The essence of who I am is revealed in my moment of greatness. And we do the opposite. We freeze frame people in their moment of scandal, their moment of fall, their moment of breakdown. We say, that's who you are.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone falls. Everyone makes mistakes. But who you are, says the lineage, is who you really are is your moment of greatness. When you ran faster than you ever did, you were clearer, you were kinder, you were loving, you were open, you were, right, sitra achra, right, the darkness, the deadness was gone. You were in your full aliveness. And the word sitra achra, just for people who haven't heard it, means the other side. You and I have talked about it a lot. When the deadness or aliveness falls away, you're in your full eros, and you are just gorgeous.
Hmm.
That's the moment. That's confession.
Hmm.
So there's this actual practice, and we're going to bring this practice right next to Sweat Lodge,
mm-hmm.
and right next to the Dharma, and right next to medicine, the practice of confessing your greatness. And to everyone that I have the privilege of studying with, my one demand is confess your greatness, right? So to brothers, to sisters, so brother, we're like wildly spontaneous, don't know what's happening here, but it's happening now. So give us a moment and model for people. It's not easy to do because we get this kind of knee-jerk humility, but that's not the God voice. That's the devil voice, if you will. The God voice is divine pride, not arrogance, not ego self, but my unique self in which she moved through me. So give us a moment. Maybe that's a hidden moment, right? That is like, oh my God, that's who I am, right? Confess your greatness, model for us what to do. And then maybe, if I can be crazy audacious, maybe anyone who's listening can do the same thing. And send it to Aub, right? Your confession of greatness, right? Confess your greatness in public, right? And inspire this ripple effect all through the world, right? Of thousands and tens of thousands of people confessing their greatness. And that's the beginning of the democratization of greatness.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your holy priest. Can you confess your greatness, my son?
You know, you invited us in the service to actually everybody find a partner and confess your greatness
Yeah.
to your partner in the service.
Yeah.
And Vailana and I, I was kind of up in the front, and
But
you
I
were
saw
up in
you
the
guys were
front.
together, right?
And she came up and, kind of knelt before me, and we were confessing, and we were confessing our greatness to each other.
Sure.
And all we could say with tears in our eyes and our hearts so full is, our confession of greatness is right now.
Sure.
Right now. Right now. Because there was a million voices saying like, oh, I could have done this differently. I had 7 different confessions of my father's greatness. And then the 7, and I know you're about to probably get there, the 7 ways that greatness, that I actually could see in my father, his greatness was also a double-edged sword that contained his vulnerability in that. So for an example of that, which was I was sharing, the first one was possibility, the cave room. Everything was possible for my dad. He was able to turn a very small amount of money into a huge fortune. Everything was possible. But in that, his vulnerability was that it was possible that these voices were telling him impossible things.
Yeah.
And so possibility was both his greatness and his vulnerability.
Right.
And the greatness in that moment was actually to be able to feel that, yeah, of course I could have said something better. At one point, I actually jumbled up the order. I had a whole mnemonic device that I was going to, be able to go in the right order. And I forgot for a second, but I just went on to the next one and
I
said,
saw it in your eyes.
I said, I'll trust that I'll be able
awesome.
to get back to this. And I did.
Yeah.
And so could I have done it better? Well, and on one hand, I could have. So maybe this was a moment of the fall. Maybe, man, I should have practiced that mnemonic device a little bit more, but no, it was perfect. And in this moment, I was as good as I could possibly be.
Right.
And that's always enough. That was always enough. And so my greatness was not a past tense or a future tense. It was reifying, making real. That moment was me at my very, very, very best.
So it's so good that I want to just, reflect it back to you. And I lived in Marin County for 2 years. They reflect things back. So it wore off for just a second. Right. So it's so beautiful. So what you're saying is that my confession of greatness was the ability to deflect the voices that said I didn't do it enough, and to actually know I just did the absolute best that I can, and my best is totally enough, and that is greatness.
Yeah, amen.
That's gorgeous.
Amen.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Right? And that's really what we did at the memorial service. We did confession of greatness as this new practice. And you confessed your father's greatness, and you confessed your greatness, and people turned to each other, as you said, and confessed their greatness. And then we realized that there's a holy and broken hallelujah. And we realized that even though it all went wrong, right, we stand before the Lord of song with nothing on our tongues but hallelujah. And we remembered that hallelujah is, in the original Hebrew, drunken, broken intoxication of the worst kind, the kind that's not beautiful, the kind that we can't find ourselves. And it's pristine, gorgeous beauty.
Mm-hmm.
It's both. It's the holy and the broken hallelujah. And we went to confess vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so again, I'm going to, tenderly, and I apologize for the surprise. Of course, it's a slightly insincere apology.
Mm-hmm.
But like, just for a moment, model for us, what does it mean to confess, brother, sweet love, right? Wondrous man. What does it mean to confess vulnerability? Confess your vulnerability.
Confess vulnerabilities right now.
Right now.
Also.
Right?
It's like, it's right now also, because right now, we spent 8 days and I was holding court in this way and doing my best in every moment. And I was many, many times, filled with this kind of divine roar, the roar of Dragonheart.
The lion.
The lion of Judah. The Dragonheart was pouring through me, and I was filled with this aliveness and this clarity. And, here now, I'm tired.
Right? We're tired, right?
I'm tired.
Yeah, I feel it.
And I've been broken and mended. I've been forged like a nihanto, like one of those Japanese swords that they put back into the fire because there's another tempering and it goes back to heat and back to folded and back to not sharp at all anymore. And I'm still in one of these points where I haven't been sharpened back up yet. There's still hammer dings and places where the steel's still molten. And so I'm vulnerable right now. Am I going to come out of this and say, that was it, that was Aubrey at his greatness as Dragonheart through the whole process? Like, no. But
Right.
also, it's my best.
Right.
It's my best. So the vulnerability also is right now, and they live.
And they're right next to each other, aren't they?
Next to each other.
Right. My confession of greatness and my confession of vulnerability. And one of the things that came so clearly this week, and it's right now. And the name of God is now. Right. Yud, the future that lives in Hey Vav Hey, and the eternity of the now. And so as we move towards conclusion here, we're tenderly friends. And I think everyone can hear we're in a different place than last week. Right?
Yeah.
You're exhausted. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
But we wanted, I'm so glad that we're getting this time.
Yeah, agreed.
Because this window, it's now. And there's my friend, the previous board chair to you, you're at the center, John Mackey, who's also local here in Austin. John said to me one day in a conversation, he said, Mark, and it was one of the most beautiful things he said to me. He said, the moment is so ephemeral, grab it. And that's true. It's how we started. There's this moment in time is never going to come again. There's a unique self of a person. There's a unique self of time. And part of this unique self of time is being exhausted together and collecting these days. And so we've tenderly, and we've said a few times today, we're trembling before she today, but it's a tender and fierce trembling. And we're introducing these two new core practices that live side by side with prayer and side by side with medicine and side by side with dharma and side by side with sweat lodge and side by side with breath work. But there's the confession of greatness. And there's actually, I want to say something a little bit fierce now. You cannot be a good human being unless you're willing every day to confess your greatness and confess your vulnerability. That's the new world. That's the new, right? Confess our greatness, confess our vulnerability. So maybe I want to, on my side, and you'll conclude for us, brother, and if there's any place else you want to go, but I want to conclude by reminding us of a miracle. So it just flashed into my mind, and no one's going to believe this, but we're going to tell them anyways, right? And it's unbelievable. So about 5 weeks ago, Aubrey and I are deep in this study in what we call Holy of Holies, and we're studying together the tree of life, which is this unimaginable, architectonic dharma of the nature of reality, and it applies to politics and to economics and to art and to spirit and to sexuality. It's the tree of life, the nature of reality. And many people understand Leonardo da Vinci's, famous man as being an expression of the tree of life. Then we walk in, and we've never mentioned your father when we did the tree of life. It's 5 weeks ago. Then it's 2 weeks later on this, we're again in Holy of Holies in this Mardi Gras festival in the lineage called Purim, in which you have to drink wine, and we've drunk quite a bit of wine. And we start talking about six. We'd never talked about your father before. And you told me the story of the fourth six. That's two. Then three, as we're getting off the phone, you say, we need to talk more about my father. When you come to Austin, we'll talk about my father. That's three. Four, we get to Austin, your dad dies. And all we do for 8 days is tell stories about your father. 5, we go into your dad's house. Vailana's there in her, right, holding space in that beautiful song. And as she's there, you look on the piano and there's a 6.
On his keyboard, actually.
On his keyboard, the place he wanted to play music.
Yeah.
There's a fourth, the fourth 6 is there. The 6 is there. 6, in the major space in the middle of the open air of the house, there's a counter. There's one book on the counter, and it's this large, oversized, dramatic book about wisdom traditions. but it's huge, and it has this huge, it's open to the tree of life that we had just finished studying, that you had no information at all that your dad had access to or was in. He's in the tree of life.
Yeah.
Then we get to the ceremony. We finish the ceremony, and you say to everybody, hey, we just put up this unimaginable statue. Come see it. And so everyone's going down. And I said to Kekim, it's great they're going down. We were exhausted. We'll sit. And then we said, no, we got to come see it. And then you send a message back. No, you got to come see it. Oh my God.
Telepathically
you send a message. I felt like, oh no, we got to come see it. Right? We come down, and in this unimaginable architecture, which has dragons all around it. Now I'm just reminding everyone of something that you don't know. So I don't know why I'm reminding you. I'm just sharing. 20 years before I met Aubrey, I wrote a book called The Way of the Dragon. Aubrey knew nothing about. Aubrey enters deep into this world of dragon and dragon heart central to your lineage. But then, without you asking, this person you had empowered to do whatever they wanted,
Daniel Popper,
it's all dragons. But then, on the inside of this kind of august, unimaginable, I don't know what to call it. It's not a sculpture. It's so much bigger than a sculpture. It's this entire artifact, this entire, what's a word for it? Installation. I don't know a word for it.
I don't know. It doesn't even have a word.
It doesn't have a word. So on the inside of it, he had put, without asking you, knowing that you were, right? He had put 4 times this elaborate, huge tree of life.
Yeah.
And we think she doesn't speak anymore. She speaks.
Yeah.
She whispers.
Yeah.
So just in mad gratitude for her whisper.
Yeah.
In mad humility. Yeah.
The the sculpture monument that we're talking about it was a moment where I was feeling what moved through my father, which was possibility. And I saw one of the great living artists of our time who makes these monuments, these sculptures. His name's Daniel Popper, and I was so moved by his work. It's like, I want one of these on our sacred land in Lockhart, at the Gardeners of Eden farm. And in honor of my teacher who passed, Don Howard, I wanted the inspiration to be the Stella Ramundi. Now, the Stella Ramundi is a flat relief. It's like 3,000 years old from the medicine culture of Chavin. And in the medicine culture of Chavin, it has a smiling jaguar holding 2 stalks of huachuma, which is the San Pedro cactus. And his face is the face of a jaguar, but it's smiling subtly because the jaguar is a symbol of that fearlessness. And in fearlessness, there's nothing to do but smile. And he's holding the huachuma stalks, which is opening his heart to his own fullness. And for them, it was jaguar, it wasn't dragon. But Daniel Popper, he kind of feels me, and he was making this installation on my land. And so all we had talked about was a 3-dimensional, 4-sided Stella Ramundi in 3D. And I saw some early models of it, and it was really kind of very close to what actually the Chavin, artifact was, the Stella Ramundi. And then it was like, all right, well, there's going to be something that's going to hold the pieces together, the 4 different statues that are linked together, that are mirrors of each other. And he knew that I was studying the wisdom of Solomon, and he said, all right, well, we'll put a Star of David at the top. And that's where we left it. And he said, and then through, a few whispers, he said, I have some surprises, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. I want you to be wowed by this, like, as long as you trust me. And I was like, of course I trust you. You're one of the greatest artists I've ever seen. So I trust you. And that was another one of the 7 confessions of my father's greatness, was trust. I trusted him. And so I didn't need to micromanage this thing, and we walked down there, and he'd added, 14 dragons on each side of the Stella Ramundi. And I was like, holy shit. And then on the inside, he had put the Sphero, the tree of life.
The tree of life.
And there was no Star of David. And because we haven't even gone into the Star of David teachings yet.
Well, you actually brought this inquiry about the Star of David. And just to see, this is how the Intimate Universe whispers, we didn't go there. He doesn't know any of this, right? He's completely unaware that this is happening. We don't go to the Star of David. We go instead to the Tree of Life and to the Dragon teachings. He doesn't know this is happening. We're exchanging dragons, as it were. We're deep in the tree of life without any communication. And he's creating this art expression of reality, which is Dragons, the Tree of Life, that he finishes. Let me just add number 10, whatever it is. He finishes literally, it's unveiled and finished the day of your father's ceremony. Right? Right?
Yeah. It's unimaginable.
It's unimaginable. So, and this is the part of the tragic is when we think that in the old days, there was prophecy. In the old days, she spoke. In the old days, she revealed herself. And today, she's hidden. No. She's speaking. She's whispering.
I mean, it was it was so beyond a whisper at that point.
Right?
It was like, it was a broadcast.
It's a broadcast, but only if you're listening.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it was only possible because he was listening.
Because he was listening.
And we were listening, and all of us had our ears and our hearts connected to the same field, and the field is fucking real.
And the field is fucking real. And when we're listening, the whisper becomes a roar.
Yeah.
Let the lion roar, brother.
So to wrap this up, I just want to speak to that and say, even when it doesn't look like it, even when you can't feel it, you can't hear it, you can't find it, like she's there. And she being Shekinah, she being any great spirit, whatever word you want to use. And again, we'll open that up at another time. Whatever you want to use for that divine intelligence that animates all of cosmos, she's there. And we find it in little ways, and we may want to dismiss it because it doesn't fit with our story of reality, but she's there. And also, there's the other voice that's there, the Sitra Achra, the voice of confusion, the voice of distortion.
Sitra Achra.
Like, that's there too. And to know that both of those forces are always there, they're always present. And if we actually can purify, clarify, we'll be able to disambiguate those voices. We'll be able to then receive the blessings that she just wants to pour into our life. And I just feel so grateful that I was there to receive the blessings, to withstand the challenges.
Yeah.
And we didn't even go into that. And I don't want to go into that
Not
this
today.
podcast. Not today.
Not today.
But there were many challenges from
Not on this
Sitra
day.
Achra. Yeah. And Sitra Achra was also, I will just say one thing, was also very clear. The whisper of Sitra Achra was also a roar at times, where there was an impossible things would happen. Lights that would flicker off and on, and pots that were burning, and wild things that were happening, Bluetooths being hijacked by strange, confused voices, like crazy shit. And also the overriding current was that she was with us the whole time, all the way, and that she's never left us. And if I look back and tell the story of my life and tell the story of my father's life, I can tell the story that she never left us. She never abandoned us.
Yeah.
Not for a moment.
Amen.
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 Amen. Yeah.
Thank you all for being on this journey with me and my brother Mark and everybody who's been a part of this. Thank you to everyone who supported me and my team and everybody here. We've all worked an impossible amount and given and really bled and sweat and cried. And thank you to everybody for being there with me, and deepest bow. And thank you. Thank you for being here with me in this journey, brother.
Quiet joy together.
Yeah.
Quiet joy together, brother. Love, man.
Yeah. Amen.
Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.